Hello and welcome to another episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. Today I have part 3 for you of our masterclass series that we've got going on with Kai Whiting and Leonidas Konstantakos, the authors of Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living In. And there is a link in the show notes to where you can grab their book, and I highly recommend that you do so. So these two amazing guys have been just so generous with their time. This is, as I said, our third part to this series. There are going to be 8 conversations in total. And today's conversation is all about the equality of errors, which is a principle that the more orthodox ancient Stoics certainly held to, that there is an equality amongst our errors in that no error is greater or better than any others, but they're all on the same plane as being marked as folly or unreasonable or unhelpful, you might say. And obviously the conversation that we have goes a lot deeper, so strap in, get ready for it, because Kai and Leo, they run fast, right? And you've got to keep up with them. And then towards the end, we obviously switch over to our Patreon Q&A, which you can only find at patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. So head over there and subscribe if you're interested in hearing the complete conversation. And it was a rich one of that. Certainly, we had plenty of conversations from those who were there, and the conversation probably went on for another 40, 50 minutes, something like that. And just so you know, on my Patreon site, you'll find a whole bunch of other things that you might enjoy. So you will find the first 3 episodes of this 8-part series that we're doing with Kai and Leo. The first one on the dichotomy of control, the second one on the unity of virtue, and now this one, the equality of errors. You'll find the full conversations there. You'll also find a backlog of roughly 70 to 80, I believe now, or probably no, 60 to 70 Seneca series episodes that I've been doing. So you'll find a whole bunch of extra stuff there. And you'll also find the new collaborations that I'm doing with Sharon LaBelle there. So you'll remember from the last episode that we shared that we're going to be restructuring the podcast towards the walled garden and doing a bit of a collaboration with Sharon LaBelle there. Now, we did release that episode last week, but in the Patreon feed this week, we're releasing our second episode on music and the spirit, which is a topic that Sharon so kindly offered to present. And we had a rich discussion, even shared a couple of performances of our own to add to the discussion and to enhance your own experience of what we were saying. So you can get all of that there at patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. And one last thing that I want to say is if you would like to attend these masterclass series that I'm doing with Kai and Leo over the next few months, then you can come along. You've just got to go to simonjedrew.com/Patreon, the reverse of the previous link I gave you. And then you'll see a schedule and you can actually register to attend these events. The only thing that I ask is that you do become a member of the Patreon community. But if you want to come along and ask questions and join in the discussion, we would love to see you there. But apart from all that, I want to thank Kai and Leo once more. Again, you can get their book, Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living In, via the link in the show notes. But without any further ado, I know this has been a long introduction. I'd like to present to you the first part of my conversation with Kai and Leo on the equality of errors. Enjoy. All right, so we have here Kai and Leo. We are discussing today the equality of errors, which is actually something, I kind of went online and I started Googling, and look, I didn't spend that long Googling, but I mean, first page of Google, you can pretty much assume that if you type something in and you can't find it there, then it's probably not in a lot of places. And so I typed it in and couldn't really find much, and then I found something, and then I was like, oh, this is actually an article from Kai and Leo. So it's not something that is widely spread out there in the community, I guess, of Stoic or seekers, you might say. And so this is something that I'm excited to dive into. And the reason why I kind of threw this quote out to everybody on the email from Seneca, well, the quote is, "Wisdom and folly are taking sides. Which will I choose?" Right? I felt like it was an interesting moment for me when I was reading Seneca's writings, almost as if he was declaring that in this stage of his philosophical understanding, it seemed to him like things were kind of taking definite, clear, black and white sides, as in, if something is wisdom, it's wisdom, is something, it's folly, it's folly, and I'm never doing a little bit of either. It's always this or that. And which side am I going to choose? And so I want to throw it over to you guys to tell me what it is that we're talking about exactly here. But then I'll probably jump in. I want to jump in with a quote sometime in the middle of our conversation, because I do imagine that we're going to get to the point where this has to then turn into a theological discussion, because at the end of the day, if you're claiming that every single error is exactly the same, then I'm wondering, where does that place something like evil, right? Like, can you have a bad action and also something that is clearly evil and outside of just an error, but is, and if there is such a thing as an error and then there's evil, does that not pull apart this idea of the equality of all errors? So I'm going to throw it over to you to make your case for the equality of all errors, and then we can kind of see where we take this, I guess. So who wants to start?
All right. Well,
I think you've done that every single week, Kai.
Yeah. I'm used to it. So, Simon, I think you got me kind of on the back foot here, and I like that. That's very good. But here's the thing. Starting with the last thing first, this concept of this difference between bad and evil. Now, I want to hear the quote later on. I want to see where you go with this. But for the Stoics, I don't want to make a false analogy here, but if the universe, if the cosmos is like an organism or a machine, when a part of it doesn't fit the rest, or when a part of it isn't doing what it's supposed to do, it's not that it's evil, right? It's just that it's bad, right? It's bad. It's kakia, right? You have to make it fit the rest of the machine or the rest of the organism or whatever, right? Now, the Stoics were physicalists, so when they're looking at a human character, right, or when they're looking at this over time, right? What is someone's character like over time? Certainly, but remember, when it comes to their mindset, it's they're immediatists. They accept occurrent thoughts. So we get impressions as human beings, and then we have a choice. What is up to us? Well, either to assent or reject, withhold assent. That part's up to us. The impressions that we get aren't really up to us, right? And the consequences that follow from that aren't up to us. That part is gone, right? What is up to us is our assents. Now, what happens here? So we get the impression and we either assent or we don't. Now, either something is true or it's false, right? So it's either you make the right, either you get a true impression, you assent to it, or you do not. And now, if you do not, if you make an error here, either by omitting something or by acting from wrong reasoning, you made the only mistake you can make here, right? If you make the only mistake you can make here, the consequences aren't really up to you after that. I mean, you should always take the consequence into consideration. The Stoics are, do discuss that, right? And they have to admit of a reasonable justification. But once that has left your assent, that the rest of that is not really up to you. It's up to the universe, up to God, right? So if that's true, then every mistake, every screw up is just as bad as every other screw up, to the extent that it's a moral error, right? It doesn't mean the consequences won't be more just preferred or less just preferred. They certainly can be, but what is up to you when we're talking about morality here, what's up to you is making the right decision. And every not making the right decision, right? Every assenting to a false impression or to a non-cognitive impression, what they might say, or to or not assenting to one that you should be. Each of that is just as bad as every other. Now that. Let me be clear. That is what we might call, if there is an orthodox view, that is the orthodox view, right? And it goes all the way back to, our sources tell us it goes back to Zeno, Perseus, Chrysippus. By the time you get to the Middle Stoics, we have one line from Diogenes Laertius that says that these two Stoics, Athenodorus and Heraclides, thought that not all moral errors are equal. I think there's a way to save that, because for it to be Stoicism at all, I don't know how it could be. How moral errors could not be equal. By the time you get into Marcus agrees in one line. I mean, for the most part, he's agreeing with Zeno and the boys on this one, that all errors are equal. You're either part of the cosmos or you're not. You're either a severed head or a severed arm or you're not, right? In one place, he agrees with Theophrastus the Peripatetic that some deserve greater censure than others, that some errors deserve more punishment than others, or something like that. I think he might be right, but it's not. I think that he's not talking about here because it's the morality of the error is worse. This, to give you one example, would be something like he says one committed from pain or one committed from desire, an error committed from pain or an error committed from desire, and the one committed from desire should be punished more, can be punished more severely. Why? Now, this is part of my dissertation, so this we're still working on this, but something that happens from pain takes one impression, right? An enemy spear comes at me, I'm injured, and now I retaliate out of anger. That's a moral error, retaliating out of anger. But you would say it happened after one impression, and I'm doing it in service to my country, say, in service to my world, in service to my family, whatever. But the errors committed by desire, these are often the result of many false ascents, right? The ones that we say, oh, building up already a hardened and incurable character, which, some characters can be worse than others, the Stoics think, right? Even though moral errors are the same. So the kind of thing like we talk about like, raping a non-combatant, which you talk about in my dissertation, and we can see, on Marcus's own column, right? This is portrayed, right? This happens over perhaps many impressions over, after several of these. So the character here is different in a way that someone defending their country that makes some moral error out of pain isn't. Now, what's the bottom line here? Both these errors are equally bad. However, one is happening from an incurable and hardened character, perhaps, and the other one might not be. Right, but that is as abstract as I'm going to get. But to make this more practical, for example, I'm going to change some of the facts around because I don't want to I don't want to bring this back up to for the families or whatever. But I had a student that passed out drunk while he was driving and he killed 3 people. Right. So what happened? What could have happened here? He could have passed out drunk and hit a tree or ended up in a ditch. Right, and he would have laughed about it, or maybe he would have done a couple of days in jail. Maybe he would have got a DUI. Maybe nothing would have happened. All right, maybe he would have hurt himself. But on this night, he killed 3 people. But if we're talking about the moral error here, right, what he is in fact in charge of, what is up to him, what was it? Deciding to get drunk, right? Deciding to get drunk and drive. This is what he can be held morally blameworthy for. It doesn't mean we don't punish someone that kills 3 people more than someone else or something like that. It just means that the error is the same. I'm taking a few things from this, Simon, and everybody else. What I'm taking for me is that this leads to, practically for the Stoics, especially it did for Marcus, I think, to reconciliation. Right? I mean, if we talk about the literature on moral luck, right? We have the German that goes to the German that goes to Argentina right before World War II, ends up being a businessman and ends up living a normal life and dying. And the one that if he hadn't gotten that job opportunity, right, in Argentina, then he would have been maybe a camp guard in during the Holocaust. One of these, is we call horrible, and the other one is just a normal life. Now, what the Stoics are going to say, right? And this is the part where we have to oh, okay, you want some Stoicism? Boom, here you go. Is that the Stoics are saying here that both of these lives are equally bad. All right, that both of these lives, the error, to the extent that you make it a bad judgment, is the same whether you decided to become a guard at Auschwitz or whether you decided money is good and moved to Argentina and lived a life, pursuing a life of money or whatever else, or even just a regular life. What do you think, Simon? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So there's a lot there that I need to unpack. Okay, so it does rationally it makes sense to me, right? But then I have some questions because okay, so it seems like I want to think about what this could lead to in a person if they start to think like this truly. And it seems like there's 2 things that are popping up for me in terms of the way that I could start thinking if this was the way that I was thinking about my errors. On the one hand, I could start thinking that, okay, well, because me doing this small little error, see, putting that small on top of it, right? Let's say I say something that's not so nice to a friend. If that is exactly the same as being a camp guard at Auschwitz, right? Then imagine the guilt that you could start to take on if you truly believed that about doing something very, very small, like the guilt that you could start assuming when. But see, I understand that on one level, because I also don't think that it's that unclear that every little thing that we do that is not in alignment with our best possible self has the potential to reach far out into the cosmos in terms of its effects, right? And far out into the future in terms of its effects, right? So every little thing that we do that is not in the best judgment does affect everything else.
But I'll just pause you there for a second.
Yeah, sure.
For example, you could have said a really unhelpful thing to your friend who happened to be Adolf Hitler. Like, if we look at consequences, then we start going, okay, so the consequences of being a guard at Auschwitz are terrible, but that's not in their control, right? So the minute that I think, oh, the consequences is obviously more terrible if I think about that in the sense of, okay, it's a guard. What does that mean? Consequences. And if I'm saying a horrible thing to my friend Kai, what does that mean? But imagine your friend's Adolf Hitler and you send him over the edge. So this is like the moral is it's not saying they're the same in terms of consequences, but it is morally, like you had a choice to say something. Let's not say nice, but let's say you were just in your judgment of a friend, right? Because nice is hard for me to qualify. Or, for example, you were just as a guard in Auschwitz, because people could say, well, how could you be a just guard? So I've given this example before where, you'll say, oh, we can't put this individual in the gas chamber because he's unwell. You could lie, saying it's not fair for this person to go there. And then at the end of the day, they will say, are you a Nazi? And you say, yes. And you say, okay, then you must go to, you must die because that's what we do. So, well, yes, because everyone's going to say that they were the just guard and therefore that would be unjust. So the minute that we put that in, we're still going towards consequences, but yet we claim as Stoics that the consequences are not under our control. So the minute you think that, you're going to the wrong reasoning, because you're going, you just told me, or everyone here would agree that it's my thoughts, my actions and attitude. But the minute you say guard, you're then going, what does that mean? And obviously, it doesn't just mean but basically the guard would mean somebody standing at a door, potentially. It's then you've got all these connotations, and it's the machine that has not always something to do with you. And then we go down that rabbit hole. So then you say, well, you either believe it, if you believe its consequences, that the problem, that you don't believe in the premise that we only control those three things.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the question that I had then. Okay. So essentially what you're saying is that the only possible error that you can make and will make in life is when you assent to an unreasonable or you make an incorrect judgment in your assent, right? And from there, the consequences will flow, right? Yeah. Which aren't necessarily up to you. But here's my question, because Leah, you had an example before where you were talking about this guy who made the choice to drive in his car. Now, if we go back to one of our previous lectures where we're talking about the unity of virtue, actually it might have been the dichotomy of control. We've probably talked about it in both. This idea that it's not necessarily like a buildup of things, but it's in this moment, it's right or wrong. And then in this moment, it's right or wrong. And then in this moment, it's something that is constantly happening. We're always making these decisions every single second, right? Now, is that guy who, made the choice to get into the car, is that not simply one choice, but is that not a collection of choices in every single moment that he is constantly making until the point where he hits the person that I'm still going to keep on driving. I'm still going to keep on driving, because at any moment he could have said, I'm going to turn this situation around and I'm going to stop here and I'm going to get out and I'm going to stop driving. Right. So it's not necessarily that the only error that he made was when he said, I'm going to get in my car. The error was actually a buildup over time of multiple errors in judgment. Do you see what I mean? And so, can I like throw this onto the back of my question about evil then, right? Because I'm gonna go to the greatest. I'm gonna go to Solzhenitsyn, and this is one of my favorite passages that I've ever read in my life, because it speaks so deeply about the capacity for human beings to make so many errors over time that things resemble hell, literally. And so then my question is going to be, what does that mean about evil in relation to your question here? So he says this. He says, if the intellectuals in the plays of Chekhov, who spent all their time guessing what would happen in 20, 30, or 40 years, had been told that in 40 years, interrogation by torture would be practiced in Russia, that prisoners would have their skulls squeezed with iron rings, that a human being would be lowered into an acid bath, that they would be trussed up naked to be bitten by ants and bed bugs, that a ramrod heated over a Primus stove would be thrust up their anal canal, that a man's genitals would be slowly crushed beneath the toe of a jackboot, and that in the luckiest possible circumstances, prisoners would be tortured by being kept from sleeping for a week, by thirst, and by being beaten to a bloody pulp. Not one of Chekhov's plays would have gotten to its end because all the heroes would have gone off to the insane asylums. Now, I don't think I've ever found a better example of just how bad things can get when people allow their incorrect judgments and their discernment to go so far away from what it means to be human that they cut themselves off from humanity and become something completely different from a human altogether. They become something. They become a vessel for evil to come into the world through these sorts of actions, right? And this is my question, because like I was saying before with the guy who got drunk in his car, it's a build-up over time. And it seems to me like there should be a way for us to say that once you have allowed so many errors to to come from your judgment, what am I trying to say here? Once there are so many errors in your judgment that you're now doing things like that, like Solzhenitsyn was describing, now it goes from not just an error. Now you've cut yourself off from what it means to be human, and now this is completely evil, right? And so that's my question to you. Where in this, with this philosophy, do we find room for recognizing that at times there are some things that are so far out there? And I'm wondering if you even think that and on top of that, what do you believe versus what you're teaching? That's what I want to know.
Right. Good question. So here's the thing. Right off the bat, I could say that if I were a Stoic, right, I would disagree with the premise that bad things lead to there's bad things and there's evil things or things like this. Okay. Right. If I were a Stoic, right. So what I would do is I would say, look, someone can have all the same impressions and assent to all the same bad impressions or the same false impressions that these torturers did or whatever else. And yet they could not be too weak to get out of bed, right? They could be too weak, or they could be hallucinating and think that they're doing this, but the consequences don't matter at all, right? I don't want to make light of this, Simon. Like the murderer and the person that thinks that death is an evil, begging for their lives, are equally making bad decisions. For the Stoic, that's what's happening. The murderer is making is miserable and making a moral error in this case because they don't know what is good, bad, and indifferent. The person begging for their life because they think that death or not begging, whatever, or just sitting, getting murdered, right? Believing that something bad is happening, and that it's also appropriate to feel bad about it, is equally wrong. Right? The Stoics must believe this for their current immediatist metaphysics to work, for their epistemology to work, for their ethics to work. If we are Stoics, if we were Stoics, this is what we would be saying. Now, I'm surprised there's I'll be honest with you, I don't Google this because I feel like I'm just going to go off on the wrong thing. But if we're reading the Stoics, if we're reading Epictetus, he is saying this. I mean, he's saying think of Menelaus, right? Who's saying, oh, my wife got taken, so I have to go over there and I have to kill everybody, I have to burn down Troy, and that is going to be my great deed. If he had just said, well, I'm better off having not, having this woman run away, right? Then we would have lost the Odyssey and the Iliad, right? We would have lost both. So these are just things that happen, and they're not under Menelaus' control. What is under Menelaus' control? Being upset. He happens to be the king of Sparta, right? And able and have he happens to have a very powerful brother who can launch 1,000 ships to go to destroy. But how many of us can't, right? And we just make moral errors and no one knows about it, and we go to sleep and then we get all grumpy, and that's the end of the story, right? The consequences aren't up to us, right? What's up to us is our own sense. And if the Stoics are right on this, then there is no. What we call evil is just like saying, well, my car broke down because I have a very evil fuel injector, right? My fuel injector is completely not doing what it's supposed to be doing. I have a very evil fuel injector. Well, at the end of the day, it's just a bad fuel injector. You just cut off from the rest of the machine. The difference is that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, can I ask something on that? Okay. I understand what you're saying with the fuel injector, but I think if we talk about the way that humans react to bad things happening, or the way that we feel when we see something bad happening, the fuel injector, the fuel injector just is a thing that has a purpose, and it's a machine that has a way of working that okay, so now I might see where you're going with this.
Humans have a purpose.
Because then you could talk about how, well, humans, we have a way of being human, and when we cut ourselves off by making decisions that are clearly unjust or clearly unreasonable or clearly unvirtuous, then we cease to be the thing that we are in the ordered system that we are a part of, right? I get that. However, when you go into the world of emotions and not rational philosophy, right, we react differently to something that seems so evil, right? This is why I went to, like last week, I talked about Jordan Peterson's definition of evil. It's because it seems like there's a line that humans are able to cross when they go from just making an error in something that they're doing, but now they're making an error knowing that it is bad for them and for the person and for everybody else, and they still do it.
Do they do it out of the error, or do they think they're doing the right thing? Because aside from mental illness, I would draw a line, for example, if someone was mentally unwell and unable to medicate. But how many humans would actually knowingly do the wrong thing and still do it? The problem is they falsely believe they're doing the right thing. They've cut themselves off, and therefore this is why I think Lawrence Becker's work can be dangerous if you take it to its logical conclusion. I therefore think it's right, therefore it's right. And you've not got the Socratic dialectic, you're not having a conversation with Marcus or Santoro or Scott, then you suddenly become this little mini dictator. At which point, quote unquote, are you evil? What, because you did something, or you decided that the person was not human? The moment you dehumanize them, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter in the moral sense of what you do to that person. The minute you've decided they're not worth your attention because they're not your brother or sister, that's when you make the error. Because you would never, no one in their right mind would torture someone if they believe them to be equal in humanity. The way that we do it as humans is that we say, but these people don't really count. These people aren't really people. That's the error. That's the error. And then I consistently. So what the very excellent prose that you read is, again, okay, so I believe they're not human, so I do this. I believe they're not human, so I do something else. I believe they're not human, so I do that. I believe they're not human, so I'm committing the same error over and over and over. It's not that in Stoicism that it would get worse. It's just that I have not realized that I'm making the same mistake over and over every time I use a different torturous instrument, right? Because the judgment is this person a human? No, therefore I can torture them. That's the issue. It's not like, oh, I suddenly became a bad person because it's by moment. I was always bad. There's no point where I suddenly became, I didn't suddenly become bad because I committed, 7 sins, because that number would be arbitrary, right? Why 7 and not 8? And it goes back to what Leonidas said about when how many turtles hold up, he said to me once, how many turtles hold up the earth? Like, it's just an arbitrary number. I made the mistake now. I made it in 1 minute. Like you said in the first one, what about if you have the situation where I love my wife, but I'm really annoyed with her? So now you think, you're thinking, right, love her. She's amazing. She's my wife. She would never hurt me, but I hate her right now. Bad thing. You're thinking wrong, but I love her really. Good thinking. But really, I'm really angry still. Okay. Are you suddenly a worse husband because now you thought about her badly twice? Or were you just the worst husband the moment you thought badly of her the first time and then the second time, and you're equally as bad, right? I think that's what Leo's trying to say. I don't know, Leo. Am I putting words into your mouth?
Just to piggyback on what Kai's saying, I agree, and I would even go further than Kai. Remember that, and this bounces off of just war theory as well. If we look at like torturing, right? And I'm going to plant my flag on this. If I'm a Stoic, then I have to say this, right? Torturing is not in itself an evil, right? What's the difference between this and dropping a bomb to burn babies in their sleep in their cribs over Dresden, huh? If the intentions are good or bad, right? The Stoics say, who is this person that is tasked with this job, right? So I certainly agree with know what Kai's saying. I would even go further. Remember this for the Stoics: if cannibalism and incest aren't necessarily bad, and if war isn't necessarily bad, and if Marcus Aurelius doing opium all day and killing Germans isn't bad in itself, then how exactly do we say, well, this one thing is so completely evil, that's so beyond? Well, no, it's just a bunch of, as if you're doing it from the wrong intentions, from a crappy character. Well, of course it's bad, but you're a very flawed machine that needs to, and like Marcus says, unlike the severed hands, unlike the severed arms, and unlike the severed heads, we, however, can desever ourselves, right? We can reconnect ourselves, where all these other severed heads that Marcus Aurelius is seeing all day long, they can't. Right, we can, and that's what's so beautiful, that no one is. Look, their characters might be shot, might be jacked, right? But when we talk about the 18-year-old soldier that's forced to torture someone, or the 18-year-old soldier that's forced to kill someone, whatever, this is not it's a moral error just as bad as kicking a stork's nest, and just as bad as making a mistake in logic, right? Just as bad as that. But this is hopefully not from an irredeemable and hard and incurable character like the 40-year-old torturer is doing it, right?
Yeah. Okay. I the pieces are starting to come together for me, but I still have. I'm going to ask two more questions, and then I'm going to throw it over to everybody else here. Throw you to the lions, and we'll see how you stand up, right? So, firstly, certainly this idea that oh gosh, there was something on my mind. No, I'm going to ask the second question first. Okay, so you said that the Stoic metaphysics, or the Stoic physics, falls apart, or the philosophy falls apart if we do not believe this, right? That everything is equal in terms of error. What falls apart? What do we lose if we separate and say there is such a thing to go beyond just error and into the world of something almost irredeemably evil?
Yeah. Right. So the Stoics cannot and are not Christians that believe that evil is a thing, right? That evil is just the absence of virtue, right? So when we're looking at the Stoic physics, right, we're looking at virtue. And what is virtue? It's a body. It's a thing that is a body, meaning it's physical, and it's perceivable, right? So I should be able to, at least if I'm a sage, I should be able to know it when I see it. That is a virtuous act. Well, how do you know, Leo? You're a sage, say, right? Pretend I have that kind of wisdom, right? Leo, how do you know that that's a virtuous act? Well, because that person conducting it has a virtuous character, right? And this is
Can you just talk to virtue being a body? Sorry, I just want to jump in there.
Sure,
because that's a massive thing that we need to clarify.
Yeah, right. So there's nothing outside for the Stoics than the stuff that is in the world, right? And the logos, this reason, this orderly shape that it's in, that's permeating through all of it, right? And like I said in one of the lectures before, for me, for someone in my field, to me, it resembles the anarchical structure of the international system, something that I can conceive of it apart from the stuff, but that's only a conception. I cannot separate it from the organization of the units in the system, right? So for me, the logos is like that. There's the stuff, And the way it's the way that it's allowed to be arranged, or the arrangement itself, is this logos, right? So when we talk about virtue or vice, let's say, we talk about human evil, we're not talking, the Stoics, I think, are not saying something like they have this metaphysical thing inside them that is, that's put on them, that manifests itself, or anything like that. No, they're just talking about the shape of someone's character, right, is wrong, right? It's not in tenor, right? It's not in tenor with the rest of the cosmos. And this is our physicalist or physics or metaphysics. And if we start saying, I think, if we were Stoics, we would say, yeah, but there's also this evil that is that humans are and that they can do. And now it's a thing that is not the body, right? That is not physical bodies, and it's not logos. So what is it? Right. So now now we have to update their metaphysics. Now we fall into what Kai and I were talking about, we call the Lipsius trap, where I want to update this, but maybe my own worldview is skewed up, not the Stoics. I mean, the Stoics are right, and there's just the physical stuff, right? And then we are putting more onto it than the Stoics need to get their morality across. And then we start coming up with that some mistakes are greater than others, and that some people are more evil than others. When really it's just if you look at the stuff in the world and the logos permeating it, the arrangement of the stuff in the system, we just say some people have horrible characters. And some people have, not so horrible characters, but are still making mistakes that are equally bad, right? The terrorist, the bomber, assume that this is an unjust act, right? Because, terrorism in itself can't be bad for the Stoics, right? But assume this is an unjust act. The terrorist bomber is just as bad as his victim if they both believe that something bad is, or that something good is happening falsely, or that something bad is happening falsely. However, like Kai was saying, and like you had mentioned, that it comes from, the terrorist is a difference that is different in the sense that there was a bunch of impressions leading up to this, carrying the bomb, putting it over there. This is impressions that happen in every slice of time, whatever those slices of time we may be. I refer to, we can talk about the metaphysics later, but the victim only has one false impression here. Right. So, I don't want to make light of this, right? This is happening now, and I was in the war myself. So, just seeing, this kind of tragedy before you, or, seeing your parts of yourself somewhere else. Now you're thinking something terrible is happening, and is it appropriate to feel bad about this? I don't want to make light of this, but if we're Stoics, if someone is a Stoic, then they have to say, yeah, the terrorist who put the bomb, and that action, and the person that is lying there crying and saying that this is terrible, are both doing something that's equally bad. Of course, the Stoic soldier dispatches one and saves the other if possible. But now we're talking about what's good for society. Now we're talking about other things, right? We're not talking about the moral error itself, right? The moral error is the same.
Okay. I don't know if I'm able to make that jump between if all error is the same, then why the hell do we have different opinions about what should happen to people based on... I
can answer that question, right?
Sure.
And I was saying this to Santara really recently, that the consequences, as if we're Stoic, is in light of what does it mean to the cosmopolitan. So when I make a logical judgment, I made a really bad judgment about my mobile phone 2 weeks ago. I should not have left my phone on vibrate, and it ruined the podcast, in my opinion, for a few moments. What was the impact on the cosmopolis? None. But it was still equally bad because, if I know phones vibrate and I know they're not on sound, they're not on sound, but that's a mistake. That's a poor judgment, right? Unwise judgment. So the consequences from a Stoic perspective is what damage does it do to the cosmopolis, sorry. So, for example, we were talking about capital punishment, and the Stoics will say it's not the crime itself that warrants capital punishment or does not. It's the impact on the cosmopolis. So most people go, capital punishment. We read this recently. A contemporary Stoic claimed that capital punishment was an evil. I would like to know if that particular Stoic would murder Hitler or not, given the opportunity. And if the person would say, yes, the state should murder, or it should be at least state permitted, that is capital punishment. Now, the argument from a Stoic perspective is, was he redeemable? Was Adolf Hitler redeemable? Mein Kampf, in my opinion, suggests he wasn't. So he's not murdered for being he's not put to death by the state, or at least permitted by the state, because you wouldn't be put in prison. That would have been a heroic act. Not because he committed crimes of murdering people, but because his character was so out of shape and so irredeemable, but because he was just, you couldn't reason with him, that you said, this is the only option that we have. Whereas if you'd gone, you know what, I was really wrong, I can't believe that I did it, you might say, okay, the thing that we need to do is put you in prison, for example, right? We might come to that conclusion. So for me as a Stoic, the consequences is in line with what is the impact on the cosmopolis. Are you poisoning the well or not? Can the cosmopolis continue? Because the only good is the logos, right? And my body and my mind is for the cosmopolis. So the moral judgment is equally wrong, but the damage done to the cosmopolis is not. And then we need to take consequences, because we say the only thing that is intrinsic here that really is the logos and the ability to reason. And you couldn't reason, I would argue quite strongly, you couldn't reason with Stalin and you couldn't reason with Hitler, which is why we as a collective in the West, I should add, say that these individuals should have been removed and permanently removed. So that's what I would say. The consequences are linked to the impact on the cosmopolis, but the moral judgment is my own, right? Because we don't talk about collective eudaimonia in that way.
So the definition of something being right or wrong and the equality of all wrong exists at the level of the decision being made, whereas what's the right word? This is such a stupid way to say it, but the divvying up of certain justices, right?
Yeah, punishment or praise or blame, right?
Yeah, exists at the level of consequence.
It might, right? So let's go back to Marcus's example again of the lust-led offender and the anger-led offender, right? The one soldier, right, has just taken has just taken a spear to the ribs and dispatches the enemy who was trying to surrender. The other one is raping a widowed German tribeswoman, right? Now, which one of these is doing this in rank and file, in service to his country, in service to Marcus, right? Which one of these would we separate from the other soldiers, right? So there's other reasons to punish people besides moral errors, right? Which, we can separate them to keep them from influencing the rest. And I would do that to the rapist, not to the one acting just from one impression of anger who's wounded, right? As a deterrent, also is another reason to punish people. And we punish people for all kinds of reasons that don't have to do with praise or blame, right? I mean, we tend to, this has nothing, this has nothing to say about the Stoics, but we aren't moral legalists anyways, generally, right? Not everything that is immoral is illegal. Not everything is illegal is immoral. There's all kinds of reasons we punish people. And the moral praise and blame might be a factor, but even our modern world doesn't seem to think it's the everything, right? So the Stoics are saying, I think the Stoics have to say, there's all kinds of reasons to punch people. Like Seneca says, right? You're Seneca, right? When he says on mercy, sometimes you got to make an example out of someone. Unfortunately, you've given this person every opportunity. Now you got to make an example out of him. I mean, Marcus Aurelius had no problem throwing a Christian, to a lion every now and again if he felt that he had to, right? So there are other reasons to punish people besides moral praise and blame. I mean, if you think about it, one other way is two sages could fight on different sides of the war, right? And one might have to kill the other if they can't get out of it, perhaps, or because of or because of information they had no way of knowing, or something like this. Just play my little game, right? So there's all kinds of reasons, dispreferred consequences happen. I know it's just kind of this throwaway line of dispreferred consequences. We talk about war and torture and everything else, right? And yet that's what the Stoics are saying, right? These are, what did Musonius say to Epictetus, right? Hey, look at you idiot! You made a mistake in this law. You omitted this premise or whatever, right? And he's like, hey, man, it's not like I killed my father or burned down the Capitol. He's like, this is a capital, right? This is a capital, so this is just as bad as burning down the Capitol, just as bad. Of course, making a mistake in logic doesn't warrant a tribunal generally, right? But another one does. But we may punish because of the consequence or because of a deterrence or separation or all kinds of reasons. But even the Stoics here are going to say, you know what? If we all, after we ended a war, just post-bellum, right? After we end a war, if we can all sit down and let our emotions control those and say the letters of the alphabet, like some of the Stoics said, right? Can we say that, look, are we blaming someone who we would mock them for not doing what they did? And if we are, well, then what's the point of punishing them? Right?
Okay, well, look, why don't we jump in and let everybody else ask their questions now? I think this has been a hefty conversation so far. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this on half speed and follow all the clues, right? because I will admit a lot of this is it's hard to put it all together tightly, especially at like 6 a.m, but that's my era. But nonetheless, what I will say is that I think that at this stage where I'm sitting is like, I see the reason, right? I see what you're trying to say, and I get how it fits into the philosophy of Stoicism. The problem that I have with saying things like, well, if I'm a Stoic, or if we're going to learn from the Stoics, then we're entering the realm then we're entering the realm of philosophical history. What did the Stoics say, as opposed to what do we truly believe, or what is right now? And I get the reason behind it, but I'm not exactly sure if I'm convinced in terms of my believing that all of these errors are on the same level. But this is a discussion to keep on having. So I'm gonna throw it over to everybody else in the group, because I want to see what they have to ask. And just for anybody who is listening on the podcast, you can get the rest of this episode at patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. So let's dive in. Hey everybody, thank you so much for listening to this first part of the conversation with Kai and Leo on the equality of error. As I said at the start of the episode, you can find the complete conversation, including the Q&A with all of our Patreon attendees, at patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. So you can go there, subscribe, and you can also get access to all of the extras that I mentioned at the start of the episode, and I would love to see you there. Again, if you want to register for future events with Kai and Leo, we've got one coming up in a couple of weeks from now, and that's going to be focused on the expanding circles of influence, right? Circles of concern, as they would put it. So that's going to be a thrilling conversation, and you can join the Q&A by going to simonjedrew.com/Patreon, and there you'll see the schedule and the registration links, and we would love to see you there. I do just ask that you become a member of the Patreon community if you would like to attend. So apart from that, I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed having this conversation, and I'll talk to you next week. Hey there, YouTubers. I just wanted to let you know that if you love this episode and you'd like many more just like it, then you can head to patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. There you'll get access to exclusive episodes that haven't been released yet, as well as many other benefits. Also, if you'd like to work one-on-one with me in my coaching practice, then you can head to simonjedrew.com/coaching. Talk to you soon.